I never thought my wedding day would be the day my heart cracked open. I stood there in my dress, smiling the way women are taught to smile. Even when something feels wrong, the room was full of people. Laughter echoed around me, but none of it felt warm. My new husband stood beside me, quiet, kind, unassuming, and somehow he became the joke. What hurt the most was not the words, it was the silence from my own son. That was the moment I realized something painful. Love does not always protect you. Sometimes it reveals who never planned to. Before I continue this story, I want to speak to you for a moment. Just you and me. No rushing, no noise. If you're listening right now, thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me your time. Stories like this are not always easy to hear. Sometimes they touch places we keep quiet, especially when it comes to family. So if something already feels familiar, please know this. You're not weak. You're human. If this story speaks to your heart, you're welcome to like this video. It helps gentle stories find gentle people. And if you want to hear more real stories like this, you can subscribe. No pressure, just an open invitation. Now, let me take you back to how all of this began. I had always been a quiet woman, not because I had nothing to say, but because I had learned early that listening kept peace. After my first husband passed away, my world became very small. The house was too quiet. The evenings stretched endlessly. The walls seemed to remember him in ways that made me ache. I had a son, my only child. I raised him alone, pouring everything I had into his life. I made sure he was fed, clothed, educated, and loved. I gave him everything I had: my time, my energy, my patience. I thought that love meant sacrifice. And so I sacrificed. Always, without complaint. Even when my own heart was aching. Christmas, birthdays, small victories, I was there for them all. I cooked meals, wrapped gifts, and smiled when he grew proud. I stayed late when he had problems. I stayed quiet when disagreements arose. I gave everything, and I rarely expected anything in return. I thought this was enough. I thought that if I did everything right, my son would grow to love and respect me. I thought family meant loyalty, and loyalty meant protection. But over time, I noticed subtle changes. Small things at first: a shortened phone call, a hesitation in a hug, a sudden eye roll when I offered advice. I brushed it off. I told myself it was nothing. I reminded myself that love meant patience, and patience meant understanding. Years passed, and still, I was alone. I watched friends laugh with their families. I saw couples holding hands, grandchildren gathering together. I envied them quietly, without bitterness, but with a small ache deep in my chest. And then, one day, I met Thomas. I hadn't been looking for anyone. I wasn't thinking about love. I wasn't imagining life beyond my grief. But he was there. Gentle, quiet, steady. His presence didn't demand attention. It didn't overwhelm me. It didn't feel like a test. It felt safe. It felt possible. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have money or fame or a large house. He had simple tastes, kind eyes, and a soft voice that seemed to speak directly to my heart. And slowly, over time, he became my comfort. Not a replacement, not a cure, but someone who made life feel less heavy. I started to imagine a future, a small home filled with warmth, a quiet table for two, evenings spent talking softly, laughing gently, or sitting together without needing words. I told myself it was foolish. I was 61. I had lived alone for decades. Why would anyone want to love me now? Why would I allow myself to hope again? But hope came anyway, and when it did, it was a soft, persistent thing that I could not ignore. When Thomas asked me to marry him, I was overwhelmed. Not because I didn't love him, but because it felt like stepping into a new world after years of quiet grief. My son was wary. I had known this would be a challenge. He had always been controlling, subtle at first, and increasingly demanding as he grew older. I had given, and sometimes it felt like he wanted to own me more than he wanted to love me. Still, I was determined. I had waited too long to deny myself happiness. And Thomas, he deserved me fully, just as I deserved him. Even in the weeks leading up to the wedding, I could feel the tension building. My son was polite enough, but there was a sharpness in his eyes. His wife had joined in with quiet glances and small smirks. I noticed them. I felt them. I tried to prepare myself, but nothing could truly prepare me for the humiliation that would come. Before the wedding, I spent hours choosing a dress, something elegant, but not flashy, something that felt like me. I wanted to look presentable, to honor the day, and to honor Thomas, who had been so kind and patient with me. I spent the morning of the wedding quietly reflecting. I thought about my life, about the years of grief, about the loneliness, about the sacrifices I had made, and about the quiet hope that had led me here. I told myself, this is a new beginning. This is a chance to live fully. This is my happiness, and no one can take it from me. That thought gave me courage. It was a quiet courage, not loud or dramatic. It was the kind of strength that comes from living through loss and refusing to let it define you. And with that courage, I stepped into the wedding hall. The room was bright. Guests were gathered. Flowers smelled softly. Candles glowed gently. Music played quietly in the background. I took Thomas's hand, and for a moment, I let myself believe that everything would be peaceful. But I was wrong, and in that wrong moment, my world would change again. I never thought I would meet someone like Thomas. Not after all those years alone. Not after my husband passed. Not after raising a son alone and carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. I had learned to live quietly, to survive without asking for help, to smile even when my heart felt heavy, to stay polite, even when people hurt me. And I had believed, for so long, that my life would always be this way. But then Thomas appeared. It was not dramatic. It was not sudden. He didn't burst into my life like a storm. He didn't sweep me off my feet with flashy words or grand gestures. He was calm. He was steady. He was kind. We met at a small coffee shop, a place I went when I wanted silence, when I wanted to read, when I needed a small corner of the world where I could think. Thomas was there, reading quietly, sipping his coffee. I noticed him because of the way he carried himself. He had a gentle presence, but he was attentive to everything around him. He smiled at the barista. He nodded politely to strangers. And when he noticed me, he offered a quiet, warm hello. There was no charm offensive, no pretense, no trying to impress me, just kindness. And that kindness felt unusual. It felt like hope. We started talking slowly. Small talk at first. The weather, a shared laugh over a clumsy barista. Nothing significant. But even in those small words, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't that Thomas was perfect. No, one is. But he was attentive. He listened, truly listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, not distracted by his phone, not judging, just listening. And I found myself opening up, sharing small details of my life, my fears, my quiet grief, my loneliness, my hopes. He never pressured me. He never offered advice I didn't ask for. He simply held space for me. It was the first time in decades I felt seen, truly seen. As weeks passed, we met often. Coffee became lunches. Lunches became walks in the park. Evenings became quiet dinners. We shared stories about our childhoods, about our dreams, about the mistakes we had made and the lessons we had learned. Thomas never judged my past. He never criticized my son. He never made me feel small for my grief. Instead, he treated me with respect. And slowly, I began to trust again. It was not immediate. I had been hurt too many times. I had lived through too many disappointments. I had been quiet for decades. But Thomas's gentle patience opened the door to hope. I noticed the little things. The way he tucked his sleeve when he drank tea. The way he remembered my favorite pastry. The way he offered his coat when I felt cold. The way he never interrupted me. The way he laughed softly at my jokes, even the bad ones. The way he asked how I felt and truly waited for an answer. For the first time in years, I imagined a life with someone by my side. Not to fill a void, but to share joy. Not to escape loneliness, but to build a gentle companionship. And then came the moment he asked me to marry him. I was shocked. I didn't expect it. I wasn't sure if I deserved it. I had lived quietly for so long, believing that love had passed me by. But his question was simple: no fanfare, no rush, just a quiet hope that we could share life together. I looked into his eyes and saw sincerity. I felt safety. I felt warmth. And I knew I wanted this. When I told my son, he didn't react the way I hoped. He was wary. He didn't understand my happiness. He didn't see the man I had come to know. Instead, he saw something else. A threat. Someone who might take me away from him. My daughter-in-law echoed his feelings. Small comments, pointed jokes, subtle glances, and even some of our extended family looked at Thomas as if he were an intruder. It hurt me, yes, but not enough to stop me. I had waited decades for a chance at love. I was not going to let anyone take it away. Planning the wedding was a strange mix of excitement and tension. On one hand, I was thrilled. On the other, I could feel the undercurrent of disapproval. My son's comments were polite enough, but they carried an edge. His wife's smiles didn't reach her eyes, and I began to see that some people would never truly celebrate my happiness. Still, I refused to let it overshadow me. Thomas and I focused on what mattered: our vows, our love, our commitment. The people who truly cared about us would be with us. And slowly, I learned something important. Happiness doesn't always need approval. Love doesn't need permission. And peace doesn't need validation from people who choose to carry anger or jealousy in their hearts. By the time the wedding day arrived, I felt calm though aware. Aware that not everyone would cheer. Aware that some laughter would sting. Aware that my son and his family might challenge this new life I was building. But for the first time in decades, I felt strong, quietly strong, not defiant, not loud, just steady. And I knew, deep inside, that whatever happened that day, I had already chosen happiness. I had already chosen love, and I would not let anyone take it away. From the moment Thomas and I began planning our wedding, I felt the tension in the air. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, creeping, like a shadow that followed every conversation. Every choice I made. My son, Michael, seemed polite on the surface. He smiled at me during family gatherings. He nodded at my suggestions for the wedding, but I could feel it under the surface. A disapproval that lingered, a sense that nothing I did would ever be good enough. I noticed it first when we talked about the guest list. I don't think we should invite Aunt Clara, he said. Why not? I asked. She always complains. She'll ruin the mood, he replied. It was a small thing, really. But it wasn't about Aunt Clara. It was about control, about deciding what was right for me. I didn't argue. I smiled, and I let it go. I told myself, this is small, it doesn't matter. But little by little, I began to notice the pattern. First, it was small remarks. Are you sure you want that dress? Do you think your guests will like this menu? Are you really okay with Thomas doing it this way? They sounded harmless, polite, even, but the tone carried a weight, a subtle undermining. Michael seemed to believe he had the right to manage my happiness, and his wife, Sandra, wasn't far behind. She would smile at my choices and then whisper to him, I don't know why she wants that. It's strange. I began to feel like a child again, like the woman I had spent decades caring for others, giving love, guidance, and support, was now being micromanaged by the person who was supposed to be my child. I tried to brush it off. I reminded myself, Michael is protective in his own way. Perhaps he was worried about me. Perhaps he didn't understand Thomas. And yet, the comments kept coming. The subtle criticisms, the sighs when I spoke, the way they would laugh at Thomas, always softly, never openly, but enough that I noticed. I began to see how quickly my own voice was shrinking. I would pause before offering an idea. I would measure my words carefully. I would second-guess even small decisions. And each time I reminded myself, I am doing this for love, for happiness. Don't let them steal that from you. Then came the family meetings. Michael insisted on discussing details about the wedding with Thomas and me. And every time, it turned into a negotiation, even about things that didn't concern him. Do you really need that many flowers? He asked one evening. Thomas answered calmly, I think it will look nice. Michael frowned. I just think it might be too much. People might not like it. It wasn't just about the flowers. It was about making Thomas feel small, making me feel that I couldn't make decisions for myself. Sandra chimed in often, her voice soft but sharp. Maybe you could consider a smaller cake, she suggested. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command disguised as concern. I felt a familiar ache growing in my chest. The one I had learned to live with over decades. The one I had thought I had left behind. I had thought love would protect me. I had thought marriage would give me support. But here it was again. That quiet undermining. That subtle questioning of my worth. I tried to speak up gently. I think Thomas and I are happy with our choices, I would say. But even when I spoke, they would find ways to twist it. You're so sure, aren't you? Michael would say. You always think you know best. Sandra would add softly. Their laughter followed every word. Not harsh, not loud, just enough to make me shrink in my seat. And I noticed something else. Their family was laughing too. And it wasn't at jokes. It was at the idea of controlling me. I began to realize that Michael had never really been my son, not in the way I had hoped. He had been using me for years, quietly, subtly, always with a smile, always with polite words. I thought back to the years I had given him everything. My patience, my love, my money, my time, and I realized he had learned the art of taking without giving. The wedding planning became harder. Each detail, each conversation was a test of my patience, a test of my love, a test of my courage. I began to notice how Thomas handled it. Calm, gentle. He never reacted with anger. He never tried to fight them. But I could see the hurt in his eyes. He was new to this world of quiet manipulation. He had never experienced this kind of family disapproval. I began to worry, not about the wedding, but about the day itself. How would Michael behave in front of friends and extended family? Would he humiliate Thomas? Would he try to ruin the day? One evening, I spoke to Thomas about my fears. I don't think they'll respect us, I whispered. He held my hand. Margaret, he said softly, they can't change who we are. They can't take our happiness. We'll be fine together. His calmness gave me strength, but my heart still trembled. I had learned too well how quickly family could betray trust, how easily someone could turn joy into humiliation. And deep down, I knew Michael's jealousy would not fade. The days grew closer to the wedding. I watched him, every glance, every comment, every smile that didn't reach his eyes. He seemed determined to control everything, to dictate how I should live, to decide who Thomas really was. Sandra's involvement made it worse. Her small jokes, her whispered criticisms, her cold glances, and then I noticed the extended family. They laughed quietly along with Michael and Sandra. Some joined in politely, some hesitated, but the atmosphere was heavy. It felt like a storm, gathering just above our heads. I tried to stay calm. I tried to focus on Thomas. I reminded myself that love had brought me here, that Thomas was steady, kind, and sincere, that happiness didn't need approval. Still, the anxiety grew. The quiet tension filled the house. Every conversation was measured. Every meeting was a minefield. I realized something important. This wasn't about the wedding. This wasn't even about my son's discomfort with Thomas. It was about control. It was about power. It was about greed. I thought about the years I had given Michael everything, and I understood how entitlement had grown in him, how he had learned to manipulate kindness, how he had become the kind of person who could humiliate someone they should love just to feel powerful. I remembered my own reactions over the years. How I had stayed quiet, how I had endured, how I had given too much and asked for nothing. And I began to understand that this wedding was not going to be the same as my first. It was not just a celebration. It was a test of courage, a test of dignity, a test of whether I would stand up for myself and for the men I loved. I looked at Thomas. He was calm, quiet, and patient. I realized then that I could no longer shrink. I could no longer stay silent. I had learned too much. I had survived too much. I had loved too deeply to allow humiliation to overshadow this day. And so, in the days before the wedding, I made a quiet decision. I would not let Michael control my life. I would not let him take away my joy. I would not allow them to humiliate Thomas. I didn't know how it would happen. I didn't know when, but I knew one thing. I would protect my happiness. I would protect my dignity. And I would honor the man I had chosen to love. The morning of our wedding began quietly, almost peacefully. Sunlight spilled softly through the curtains. I woke early, Thomas beside me. The house smelled of coffee and fresh flowers. I tried to focus on the joy of the day, but there was a tension in the air I couldn't ignore. A quiet, pressing feeling that something had shifted. I had spent weeks preparing my dress, the small details, the quiet happiness Thomas and I shared, and yet I felt a shadow cast by my own son. Michael and Sandra had been unusually distant that morning. They smiled politely when I passed, but there was an edge in their eyes, a subtle kind of calculation. It made my stomach tighten. Thomas noticed it too. He reached for my hand. Margaret, he whispered softly. It's okay. We are here together. Nothing else matters today. I nodded, squeezing his hand back. His calm gave me strength, but inside, I felt a quiet storm gathering. The guests began to arrive. Friends, distant relatives, neighbors, people who had known me for decades. The air was warm with excitement. The gentle murmur of voices, the faint clinking of glasses. I smiled at everyone. I greeted people with polite warmth. But my mind kept flicking to Michael and Sandra. I wondered what they would do, how far they might go. The ceremony began quietly. Thomas and I exchanged vows in soft, heartfelt tones. I focused on his eyes, on the man who had given me love again, on the life I had finally found. Everything seemed perfect, until the moment we were announced as husband and wife. That's when it began. Michael stood, Sandra stood with him, and in front of nearly 400 guests, he said the words I had feared. This man, you actually married him? The laughter came quickly, polite at first, then louder, the kind of laughter that stings even when it's quiet. I froze. Thomas stayed calm beside me. He smiled faintly, trying to ease the tension, but my heart sank. They called him worthless, a nobody, not good enough for me. I could feel my face flush, but I didn't speak. Not yet. The room grew heavier. Some guests whispered, some gasped, but most didn't intervene. The laughter of their family rang in my ears. I remembered the years I had given Michael everything, all the patience, all the love, all the money I had quietly provided. And now he was standing here, mocking the men I loved. Thomas's hand tightened around mine. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I understood. He was hurt, yes, but he was steady, patient. He had not expected this either. I could see the confusion on some guests' faces. They didn't know the family dynamics. They didn't understand the quiet cruelty that had built over years. All they could hear were insults and laughter. Something inside me shifted then. A quiet, deep realization. Years of restraint. Years of kindness that had been exploited. Years of emotional manipulation. I stood taller. I drew a breath. I decided I would no longer allow this. Not here. Not today. I addressed the room softly, but with strength. My son, I said, you have been given everything I could give. Love, patience, trust, support, and still, you choose to mock and humiliate. The room went silent. Even Michael's family looked uneasy now. They didn't expect confrontation. They had expected me to stay small, to endure quietly, as I always had. I continued, voice steady. This is not about Thomas. This is about you. Your greed, your disrespect, your failure to understand kindness. I saw Thomas's eyes well up, but he didn't step forward. He trusted me, and that gave me more strength than I thought I had. I went on. I have given my life to love and care for my family, and today, I realize that some people take without ever giving, and that is their choice. But I will not allow it to continue. I looked directly at Michael. You are not welcome here anymore. Not today. Not ever again in my home. Not ever again in my life. Sandra tried to speak. She started, but I held up my hand. No, you will leave now. All of you. It was quiet for a moment. The air hung heavy with shock. And then, slowly, Michael's face hardened. He realized I meant it. He realized I was no longer afraid. They left. Michael, Sandra, their entire entourage. I watched them go. I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. This was my son, and yet, He had betrayed the men I loved, and he had chosen greed over family. Thomas finally spoke softly. "Margaret," he said, "I should have told you sooner." I looked at him, curious and cautious. "What do you mean?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "I didn't want anyone to know until it was real. I am a billionaire. I chose to live quietly, to find someone who would love me without knowing what I have." I stared at him, stunned. Everything made sense now. The disbelief, the subtle tests, the careful distance. Michael's cruelty had nothing to do with protection. It had everything to do with greed. He wanted control, money, advantage. He never cared about love or happiness. I felt a weight lift. Finally, after years of quiet manipulation, after decades of emotional restraint, the wedding continued. Not with fear, not with shame, but with love. Real friends, genuine family, people who cared. And Thomas, beside me, calm and patient, finally at peace. I realized that happiness is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, it is calm, it is steady, and it is finally free from those who would diminish it. The moment Michael, Sandra, and their family walked out of that hall, the air felt different, strange, quiet, and yet light. I stood there for a long moment, hand in Thomas's. The weight I hadn't realized I had been carrying for decades began to lift. A breath I didn't know I had been holding escaped softly. Thomas looked at me calm as ever. "You did the right thing," he said. His voice was gentle, but it carried a strength that made me feel steady. "I trust you," he added softly, "and I always will." I nodded, feeling tears sting my eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of clarity, of finally feeling seen. The guests slowly returned to normal. Some whispered, some glanced at me with quiet admiration. A few came forward to offer hugs, gentle congratulations, smiles filled with understanding. And for the first time, I realized something important. Not everyone would understand my choices. Not everyone would approve. But I didn't need their approval. I only needed to honor my own heart. I remembered every Christmas, every birthday, every small moment of sacrifice. The late nights I had stayed up when Michael was sick. The meals I had prepared. The clothes I had mended. All the years I had given quietly, without recognition, without thanks. And suddenly, it became clear why I had felt invisible. Why my feelings had been ignored. Why my patience had been mistaken for weakness. Because I had been giving to the wrong people. I had been giving to someone who would never truly see me. Someone who measured love in their own narrow way. Someone who valued greed over kindness. Someone who could never understand the heart that had raised them, nurtured them, and supported them through every storm. And yet, I felt no anger. Not really. I felt sadness. A deep, quiet kind of sorrow for what could have been. For the relationship that had been distorted by greed and entitlement. For the son I had raised, who had chosen a path I couldn't follow with him. Thomas squeezed my hand. "Margaret," he said softly, "you have been brave. You have shown strength in ways most people can't imagine. And you did it with grace. You didn't shout. You didn't yell. You stood tall quietly. And that made all the difference." I leaned my head on his shoulder. The calm warmth of his presence felt like home. For years, I had lived quietly, carefully, making myself small. But now I felt something new. Freedom. Freedom to exist fully, to take up space, to live without fear of judgment or betrayal. And as I looked around at the remaining guests, the people who had stayed, who had truly cared, I realized another truth. Love is not measured by blood alone. It is measured by respect, by care, by genuine presence, by choosing to honor others, even in their absence. The wedding continued, quietly, but joyfully. Thomas and I shared our first dance softly, in each other's arms. I felt tears prick at my eyes, but this time they were tears of healing, not of grief, not of hurt, but of understanding. I remembered all the times I had doubted myself, the times I had questioned whether I was worthy of love, the moments I had felt invisible, unimportant, overlooked. And I realized I had been worthy all along. I had been seen by those who mattered, by Thomas, by the friends who truly cared, by my own heart. finally awake to its own worth. Later that evening, after most guests had left, I sat quietly with Thomas in the soft glow of candlelight. He reached for my hand. "Do you feel okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "I feel alive," I said softly. "Alive and finally free." We talked quietly about the betrayal, not in anger, but in reflection. I told him about the small things I had ignored for years, the subtle dismissals, the quiet manipulation, the ways Michael had taken my generosity for granted. And he listened, patiently, without judgment, just understanding. I realized how much I had endured, how much I had sacrificed silently, how many moments I had held back tears to keep the peace. And for what? For a son who didn't truly see me, for a family that valued greed over love. It was a painful realization, but it was also liberating. I could let it go. I could release the weight I had carried for decades. I could choose peace over anger, healing over resentment, freedom over obligation. Thomas and I talked late into the night. We spoke of the future, of the life we wanted to build together, of the quiet moments we would share, the dinners at home, the walks in the park, the laughter that would no longer be tainted by judgment or fear. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years, a deep-rooted calm that comes from understanding one simple truth. Happiness cannot be taken from you. It is yours to claim, even when others try to diminish it, even when betrayal comes from those closest to you. I thought about Michael. I thought about the years of frustration, the silent resentments, the quiet manipulations, and I forgave him, not for his sake, but for mine, to release the hold he had over my peace. I forgave the years of disappointment, the small wounds, the subtle betrayals, the greed that had overshadowed love. I forgave because holding on would only hurt me further, because healing begins when you release what you cannot change. And I realized something else. Life is too short to remain small, too precious to be wasted on people who do not honor your heart, too valuable to live quietly under the weight of others' expectations. That night, I looked at Thomas and smiled softly. "I feel ready," I whispered. "Ready to live fully, ready to love without fear, ready to finally exist for myself, not for anyone else." He held me close. "You deserve that," he said. "You deserve peace, love, happiness, and no one can take that from you." I knew he was right, and for the first time in years, I truly believed it. The days that followed were quiet, but filled with meaning. I reflected on the past, on the moments of subtle betrayal, and I understood that they had shaped me, but they would not define me. I began to write quietly in my journal, each word a small release, each page a reminder of strength, resilience, and dignity. I spent mornings slowly, drinking tea while watching the sunlight filter through the curtains. I felt the warmth on my face and recognized it as freedom. Freedom to be myself, to choose happiness, to honor my heart above all else. The wedding had shown me something profound. Love is not about obedience. Love is not about control. Love is about respect, trust, and mutual care. And I finally understood that the people who truly love you will honor your heart, even in silence. Even now, as I reflect on that day, I feel a quiet pride. Not for the confrontation, not for the anger, but for the courage it took to stand quietly, firmly, and claim my dignity. I learned that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it shows up in calm, steady ways. Sometimes it is the quiet refusal to be erased. And that day, I discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The days after the wedding were quieter than I had imagined. Not peaceful, not restful, but quiet in a way that demanded reflection. I stayed in our home with Thomas. He didn't press me to talk. He simply offered his presence. His calm, steady presence. It felt like a safe harbor after the storm. I kept replaying the events in my mind. Michael's words, Sandra's laughter, the way they had stood there, mocking, confident, as if they owned the world. I thought about how easily they had forgotten respect, how quickly they had discarded the love I had given them all those years. It hurt deeply, but I knew I had done the right thing. Still, I couldn't ignore the messages I started receiving. Michael reached out quietly at first. A text, a voicemail, something small, as if testing the waters. It was always about money, never about asking how I was, never about apologizing, never about trying to understand. Just money, financial help, requests cloaked as concern, but I saw through it. I felt my chest tighten every time a message came through. The old habits, the urge to give, to protect, to forgive rose up inside me. But I reminded myself, this is not kindness. This is manipulation, and I would not fall for it again. Thomas noticed the tension in my shoulders. Do you want to read it? He asked softly. Or do you want to leave it for now? I shook my head. Not yet, I said quietly. I need to feel it fully before I respond, or rather, before I don't respond. And so, I allowed myself the time to feel the grief, the frustration, the sadness, the quiet rage that comes not from sudden anger, but from years of being overlooked, dismissed, and used. I remembered every Christmas he had ignored my wishes, every birthday he had taken without thought, every decision he had made without considering me. And now, he had the audacity to act as if he could demand more. I felt the tears come softly at first, a quiet, slow release. Thomas held my hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to fix it. He just held my hand and let me feel what I needed to feel. The next message was more aggressive. Michael demanded I give him a sum to cover some debt. He wrote about how he had no other option, how he needed family support. I read it slowly, every word, every sentence, and I realized I had been giving for years, but it had never been enough. Nothing I had ever done would satisfy him. I felt a deep sense of clarity. I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. He was not reaching out because of love. He was reaching out because of need, because of greed, because of entitlement, and I refused to be a part of it. I typed a short reply. I am not giving you money. I am not negotiating. This is not about family anymore. It is about boundaries. Please respect that. I sent it, my hand shaking slightly, but I felt a quiet strength in doing so. For the first time in decades, I was protecting my own heart, and it felt freeing. The days continued slowly. Thomas and I spent our mornings talking quietly over coffee. Afternoons were spent walking in the garden, watching sunlight flicker through leaves, listening to the distant sound of children playing in the neighborhood. I began journaling again. Each entry a release, each word a reminder of my strength. I wrote about the wedding, about Michael's greed, about Sandra's laughter, about the calm patience Thomas had shown, and about the woman I was finally becoming, someone who could love fully, but also protect herself fiercely. Occasionally, Michael called. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't answer, and each time, I felt a sense of power I had never known. Power not in retaliation, but in choice. The choice to be seen, the choice to exist without fear, the choice to say no to those who would harm me emotionally. I remembered my first husband. I remembered the years I had given freely, the quiet strength I had carried, and I realized something vital. I was still that woman, but now I had wisdom, I had experience, I had boundaries. Thomas encouraged me to reconnect with friends I had drifted from, people who had supported me quietly, people who had celebrated my victories without taking anything in return. I began to host small gatherings, afternoons with tea, evenings with shared meals, laughter, genuine and unforced. Through these moments, I began to rebuild a life that was mine entirely, a life filled with people who truly cared, a life where I could give freely, but also receive freely, where my kindness was valued and my presence respected. Michael's messages slowed eventually, but I didn't feel relief immediately. Instead, I felt a quiet acknowledgement. This was a new chapter, one where I defined my own terms, where I would not bend to manipulation, where love and respect were not optional, but necessary. I spoke to Thomas one evening as the sun set. The hardest part, I said quietly, was realizing that he never cared about me, not truly. He cared about what I could give him. Thomas nodded slowly. And yet, you still love him, he said softly. Yes, I admitted, but in a different way. A way that doesn't hurt me anymore. I realized that forgiveness didn't mean opening the door. It didn't mean providing access. It didn't mean enabling manipulation. It meant releasing the burden of expectation. It meant living fully, without fear of disappointment. The quiet days turned into weeks. I found joy in small things again, in tea on the balcony, in reading novels I had ignored for years, in long conversations with Thomas, in the laughter of friends who cared, and through it all, I began to understand a profound truth. The people who betray you often reveal the greatest lesson. They show you your own strength. They show you your capacity for dignity. They force you to stand firmly for your own heart. Michael eventually sent a final message, a demand, a reminder of debts. I read it calmly. I didn't respond, and I felt peace because I had made a choice to protect myself, a choice to honor my own worth, a choice to live fully, without the weight of entitlement from those who could never respect me. The days after the wedding had been difficult. Yes, lonely at times, quiet in a way that made me reflect deeply, but they had also been liberating. I began to see clearly, to recognize my own needs, to trust my own instincts, to love without fear those who truly deserved it. I realized that life does not always give second chances. Sometimes it gives lessons, sometimes it gives clarity, and sometimes it gives a quiet strength that becomes the foundation for everything else. That'd be why the time a month had passed. I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in decades. Michael had no power over me anymore. Sandra had no influence. And Thomas, quietly loving and patient, remained beside me. My heart felt full. My mind was clear. And my soul finally rested. I had learned that betrayal can be painful, yes. It can cut deep. But it also has a way of revealing truths about who people are and about who you can become when you refuse to be diminished. And in that quiet understanding, I felt the first true sense of freedom in my life. Freedom to love, to exist, and to be truly seen. The days slowly unfolded, quiet but full of meaning. After the confrontation with Michael, after the cold realization of Sandra's laughter, I felt a strange combination of relief and exhaustion. Relief, because I had finally stood up for myself. Exhaustion, because the weight of years of quiet suffering had not vanished overnight. It lingered in my chest, a subtle heaviness reminding me of everything I had endured. I spent the mornings slowly, gently, with Thomas by my side. He never pressured me to talk, never rushed my healing. He simply existed with me, steady, calm, patient. Some mornings, we sat on the balcony, sipping tea, watching the sunlight shift through the leaves, listening to the distant sounds of life outside. The simplicity of it felt like a balm to my weary heart. I began journaling again. At first, the words came slowly, hesitant, almost afraid to break the silence I had carried for so long. But as days passed, they flowed more freely. Each page, a release, each sentence a small triumph. I wrote about the wedding. I wrote about Michael's betrayal, about Sandra's mocking laughter, about the fear that had gripped me before I stood up. And I wrote about Thomas, his quiet strength, his unwavering patience, the way he had held me when I felt invisible, his belief in me when I had doubted myself. I realized that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt not in the people who betrayed me, but in those who truly valued me. Thomas had shown me that. He hadn't tried to fix the past. He hadn't judged me for my choices. He simply believed in me. I spent afternoons reconnecting with old friends, those I had drifted from over the years, people who had supported me quietly, who had celebrated my victories without judgment, without expectation, without taking from me what I could not give. I realized that part of my peace came from choosing carefully whom I allowed close. I had spent years giving freely, sometimes to people who didn't deserve it. And now, I understood the importance of boundaries, of knowing who truly cares, and who only reaches out when it benefits them. Michael tried again. Weeks later, a phone call, a text, a veiled demand for money. I read it carefully. I thought about all I had given over the years, all the times I had stayed quiet to protect him, all the ways I had hoped he would understand my love. And I realized he had never seen it. He had never understood it. I typed a calm reply. I will not be part of your debt. I will not give you what you have not earned. I will not enable your choices. You must find your own way. Sending it felt like a small victory. Not over him, not in triumph, but over the fear that I might revert to old habits, over the urge to give when giving would harm me. I felt a quiet pride in my own strength. I began to embrace small joys again. Tea in the morning, books that had waited unread for years, soft music that filled the house without needing to compete with tension, slow walks in the park with Thomas, watching sunlight play across the grass, listening to the wind through the trees. I noticed the small details that I had ignored while focused on worry and duty, the way a bird hops lightly across the garden, the smell of rain on warm earth, the quiet hum of neighbors' voices in the distance. I began to rebuild my life piece by piece. I reconnected with myself, with my desires, with my hopes and dreams that had been quieted by years of obligation. Thomas encouraged me gently. "Margaret," he said, "you deserve peace. You deserve happiness. You deserve to exist fully without fear." And slowly, I believed him, not just believed him, but allowed it to enter my bones, to sink into my heart, to reshape the way I thought about myself. I stopped seeking validation from those who had never offered it. I no longer waited for Michael to apologize. I no longer hoped for Sandra to acknowledge her cruelty. I realized that peace doesn't come from others. It comes from within. And as I sat quietly one evening, watching Thomas prepare a simple dinner, I felt something I hadn't in years. I felt whole. Not because the past had been erased, not because betrayal had been undone, but because I had reclaimed myself, because I had decided that my value did not depend on their recognition. I began to plan small projects for myself: gardening, painting, writing letters not to Michael, not to Sandra, but to myself, documenting this new chapter of my life. I shared meals with friends, laughter spilling freely without the weight of tension. I allowed myself to receive kindness, something I had often denied in the past, believing it would cost me something I couldn't afford. Slowly, trust returned, first in myself, then in the world around me. I noticed the genuine gestures of care, the smiles that weren't forced, the hands that offered support without expectation, and with trust came peace. The kind of peace that doesn't shout, that doesn't need to be noticed, that simply exists quietly, deep in the chest, settling like soft sunlight on a calm morning. I realized forgiveness wasn't about Michael. It wasn't about Sandra. It was about me, releasing the weight of expectation, letting go of resentment, making space for love and joy. I began to dream again about future trips with Thomas, quiet dinners with friends, new adventures I had long postponed. The freedom to make choices for myself without fear of manipulation or betrayal felt like a new life. And in that quiet reflection, I finally understood something profound. Happiness is not something given. It is something chosen. It is something nurtured within. By the end of the month, I felt more alive than I had in decades. Michael's greed and cruelty no longer haunted me. Sandra's laughter no longer pierced me. I had chosen peace. I had chosen strength. I had chosen myself. And as I looked at Thomas, at the life we were building together, I smiled softly. This was not the life I had expected. It was better, calmer, truer, filled with respect, love, and quiet joy. I realized that rebuilding trust takes time. It takes patience. It takes courage. But it is possible. Trust can be rebuilt, not in those who betray, but in those who honor you, who see you, who care. And peace. Peace is always within reach, if you have the courage to claim it, to protect your heart, and to choose yourself first. After all that had happened, I began to carry myself differently. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, with awareness. Every morning, I reminded myself that my feelings mattered. Not just the feelings I allowed others to see, but the ones I had held back for decades. The ones I had hidden behind smiles, behind patience, behind the hope that love would make them unnecessary. Thomas and I would sit together, watching the sunrise spill golden light across the house. We would sip coffee slowly, and sometimes say nothing at all. And in those moments, I felt deeply at peace. I noticed myself in ways I had forgotten. The way my hands moved, the way my eyes lingered on small details, the quiet strength in my voice that had been waiting to return. I began to speak more freely, not out of anger, not out of rebellion, but because I understood that my voice mattered. My thoughts, my needs, my boundaries all deserved to be heard. The wedding had taught me a painful lesson, but also a profound one. I realized that love is not always what we imagine. Sometimes it comes quietly, sometimes it waits for years, sometimes it hides in people who simply want to see you. Thomas had chosen to love me fully, without judgment, without expectation. He had never tried to control me. He had never tried to overshadow my voice. He had simply been there, steady, kind, and present, and that was a kind of love I had never known before. A love that built me up instead of tearing me down. A love that healed wounds I didn't realize were still open. A love that taught me patience, trust, and the quiet joy of being valued. I thought often about my son, Michael, about how his greed and cruelty had hurt me, about how he had tried to make my life about him, even when I was most vulnerable. But I understood something important. His actions were not about me. They were about his choices, his character, his limitations. And I could not change him. I could only protect myself. I could only choose dignity. I could only choose peace. In the weeks after the wedding, I began to rebuild my life. Small joys became my priorities. Cooking meals for Thomas, planting flowers in the garden, reading novels I had long set aside, walking quietly in the early morning, listening to the soft hum of life around me. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with, people who had cared quietly without demanding anything in return, people who reminded me that not all relationships are transactional, that love and care can exist freely and without manipulation. The freedom I felt was profound, not loud or dramatic, but steady, like a river flowing quietly through my heart. I realized that peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of boundaries, of self-respect, and of people who honor you. I thought about forgiveness, not the kind that excuses harmful behavior, but the kind that releases the weight of resentment. I forgave Michael, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to let go of the pain. Sandra faded from my thoughts naturally. Her laughter, her mockery, could not touch me anymore. I had built a shield around my heart, not a wall of bitterness, but a shield of clarity and self-worth. Thomas and I began dreaming about the future. Quiet trips to the countryside, long evenings, filled with stories and laughter, simple meals shared with friends who valued us, moments of joy carefully chosen, carefully nurtured. I understood that happiness is not something given. It is something chosen. It is something nurtured. It is something protected. I also learned that love is not always loud. It does not always need grand gestures. Sometimes the most powerful love is quiet, consistent, and deeply respectful. It sees you. It honors you. It allows you to grow without fear. I thought often about my past, the years I had given silently to Michael, the times I had ignored my own needs, the times I had stayed quiet to maintain peace. And I realized I had done what I could at the time. Now, it was my time, my turn to be seen, my turn to be valued, my turn to live fully. Every day, I reminded myself, I am worthy, I am loved, I am enough, even when others forget, even when recognition is slow, even when betrayal leaves scars. I built a life that was mine entirely, a life with Thomas by my side, filled with respect, love, and gentle laughter, a life where my kindness was cherished, my presence honored, and my heart protected. I smiled again freely. I loved again deeply. I existed fully, unapologetically, and I understood a simple, quiet truth. You are seen. You are loved. You are worthy, even when the world forgets, even when recognition is delayed, even when betrayal leaves its mark. Care for your heart. Honor your feelings. Speak softly. Love deeply. Exist fully. That is enough. And in this quiet, steady life I had chosen, I finally felt what true happiness is, not the absence of pain, but the presence of love, respect, and self-worth.